Welcome to this summit, this virtual summit. My name is Sandeep Nawathe. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering for the Experience Platform at Adobe. Today, I want to talk to you about next generation distributed personalization in edge computing environment. There are some new exciting things that are happening at Adobe. These all fall along the line of large-scale databases, extreme fast access times and computational times, and making it happen in a distributed environment. Before we get into all the details, I just want to kind of briefly touch on Adobe, its own initiatives. Adobe itself is been changing the world through digital experience. We're leading the digital experience wave. And we're leading this wave through unleashing creativity, accelerating productivity, and powering digital businesses. Adobe today is the only company that provides the suite of products that start with creativity, content creation through content activation, and this entire flow, Adobe actually provides a set of products. And the strategy that we have actually wasn't something that we just came up overnight. Adobe itself started its journey of changing and doing a digital transformations more than 10 years ago. This is the simplest way to start looking at what does that journey for a customer look like? Is discovering of the products and the brand, trying them, buy a product, using them, renewing them. It looks very simple when I look at in these few words. But every step of the way in this, for every customer, you have to collect data, understand this particular customer, try to figure out what is the best experience you can deliver and delighting the customer. That is what Adobe actually started doing more than 10 years ago, and this has paid off tremendously. And as Adobe has done this, there's a lot of learnings. And these learnings Adobe has been using to create new set of products. And the product pillars themselves, when I start looking at, it starts with firstly data. And you can understand data and content becomes the first two things one has to start thinking about. But the data here, we're talking about big data scale data. Data coming in from enterprise systems, coming from streaming systems, data governance, data modeling, building insights, AI, ML on top of this data. This all needs to start coming together. Next part is how do you enable content and how do you enable commerce? Adobe has a suite of products that actually allow you to create content. Creativity becomes the most important part there. The central piece here, customer journey management, we will be focusing quite a bit more on. This is where the personalization picture starts coming into play. Now, customer journey management is a simple notion saying the customer for any enterprise is going through a journey, his journey of experience with this enterprise, and every step of the way, every digital service, whether it's a store, it's an assisted channel, it's a web, you want to provide delightful experience, personalize that experience, individualize it to this customer. Doing that for every single customer becomes the scale challenge. The products that Adobe is offering is trying to go for this managing customer journeys. Another important area Adobe is in investing is experience intelligence, which is building essentially AI, ML, and there's a significant investment Adobe has done in trying to provide this, and we will be touching on this one a little bit more. And while doing all these things, Adobe has been keeping in mind that we need to build new generation systems, which are all open ecosystems, providing extensible data models, providing open source systems, providing APIs, providing essentially systems where our partners, our customers can start extending these systems. That has become the most important part for Adobe. Let's start understanding to accomplish this real-time experience and this personalization that Adobe has actually accomplished for itself. What are the challenges that an enterprise is facing? So first part of this challenge, I would actually say is, what is a customer really look like when from an enterprise perspective? Every single surface has disconnected and identity that is actually coming in. You have one identity in web, which you call anonymous. Mobile has a different one. You have a different one in the store. You have a different one that is actually getting in an email. Each identity is different, and each identity results in data that is also coming that is fragmented per individual identities. Unifying this data becomes the next challenge. So disconnected identities and unification of data. And once you have that, next part is that it is very important to start building the intelligence on top of these data sets that we are bringing together. Today's AI ML tends to operate in silos. The AI ML needs to become the foundation, and AI ML cannot operate well if you cannot bring this all data together and at the scale, at the latencies that is required for AI ML to really start taking action on top of this. Once an enterprise starts talking about bringing this much data together, the next challenge comes in as saying we live in an environment where governance of the data, privacy regulations, consent, opt-in, all these security of the data has become extremely important. Building this pieces become the critical part of getting all this data together. And once you have all these pieces done or together, next part is how do you take this information, distribute it at the place of where the decisions are happening. We call the edge networks, where actual personalized decision is getting delivered. This delivery of the personalized experience, if the data coming from identities and profile is siloed, naturally results into fragmented experience. And this entire problem set Adobe is trying to solve via what we call Adobe's experience platform. And Adobe's experience platform has become the foundational piece of Adobe Experience Cloud. The experience platform itself starts with this first part, which is data pipeline and governance. Data pipeline is the ability to bring in data from various different data sources in a batch and streaming manner, being able to ingest it, modeling it, doing ETL on top of this data, and applying governance principles. And then using this data to build a central piece, what we call the real-time customer profile. You'll be spending a lot more time understanding what a customer profile means and its association, which is the next few steps, which is once you have the data together, the AI machine learning models run on top of this, start extracting the most relevant insights. And these insights are important for delivering the activation, what we call the personalization, individualization. This needs to be done in every single channel that a customer is interacting. And you need to know the precise data on every customer, every single point in time in real time. Now, this Adobe Experience Platform has become the foundation of Adobe Experience Cloud. So if you start looking at Adobe Experience Cloud as a whole, it's a set of applications, starting with Marketing Cloud. Marketing Cloud has Experience Manager, provides the large-scale content management, Campaign and Marketo that provide B2C and B2B campaign management, Target, which provides recommendations, personalizations, A/B testing kind of services, Analytics Cloud that provides analytics as well as audience management, advertising, which is all the DSP use cases, okay, which is again extreme high scale and high velocity systems, e-commerce systems actually through Magento. These are the applications. They themselves are layered on top of intelligence services and application services. And below all this thing is the foundational layer, what we call Adobe Experience Platform. And Adobe Experience Platform, the central piece of that Adobe Experience Platform has become the real-time customer profile. So real-time customer profile, as I start looking at details of real-time customer profile, we just touched on the data ingestion portion. The data is coming from, let's say, CRM system, customer support system, point of sale systems, web mobile transactions. This all data is coming from various different places. It's also coming in a distributed form because edge networks today, which are distributed through clouds, are collecting information that is continuously the interaction information of a given customer. This data is multimodal. This data has different schemas. This all needs to get stitched together. That forms the next part that is actually the customer profile, or we call the 360 view of a customer. In a 360 view, one important aspect is that we have to solve that identity fragmentation problem. Identity fragmentation problem is an important one where each of these channels I talked about, CRM, okay, point of sale, have an identity of a customer that is available. This identity needs to be put together in terms of what we call the identity graph. Adobe's Experience Platform builds an identity graph. It just simply stitches identities, doesn't worry as much about the data. But the customer profile itself is made up of these different fragments. These different fragments actually come together, and these fragments essentially build a customer profile. On top of that, you got the experience intelligence layer that is getting built. Experience intelligence services include customer AI, journey AI, attribution AI. These are themselves deep topics. There are several blogs that actually been written on this one. In some other forums, I will be happy to talk about this. And on top of this is the real-time edge delivery system. This is where personalization becomes important. So far, when we are talking about the data ingestion, it's coming from disparate sources and edge networks coming together. The centralized piece is the customer profile, where massive scale of data that is actually coming together. And now in the edge, real-time edge delivery, this data is getting into every single distributed location where we need split millisecond level access to this data, being able to use these AI and ML-based models, human rules, and personalize content and the data and provide the delightful experience. That is really the story of providing personalization. With that, let's start getting into the details of the customer profile itself. Now, most of my rest of the discussion is going to go around customer profile, understanding the customer profile, its relation to actually personalization, as well as the scale challenges that we actually typically see with respect to this kind of data sets. Before we actually get into understanding the nature of data, let's understand the typical use cases that we see about for the real-time customer profile. First use case I actually talk about saying profile lookup. This is a very innocent looking use case. Hey, you're just doing a point lookup on saying a simple identity, pull the data and I got it. But if you start thinking really about what is happening in a profile lookup, we just talked about that the identities are not, there is no single identity. There are multiple identities that are actually related to each other. And that relationship is important. We also talked about the fact that the profile data itself is fragmented data. Each fragment is coming, let's say one from CRM, one from web, one coming from phone, a mobile device. These are fragmented pieces. Their relationship is unknown at the time the data is arriving in real time. But at some other point in time, somebody understands relationships. How do I take all this stuff? So when I look at the profile lookup, it's really a massive scatter gather query that has to run. You're taking a large data, pulling together this information and building a view of a profile. And mind well, one more thing has to happen in a profile lookup. For the same exact person, two different people and two different use cases may see a different profile. Why does that happen? Because we got governance issues. We need to make sure that for a given use case, the view of the data is tailored correctly based on role-based access controls, based on data usage and labeling, based on the privacy policies, consent, opt-in. These things drive what you're going to be seeing. Taking all this into account is a simple profile lookup. Profile lookup, once it's done, then in the real-time personalization, if you look at what is happening is I have a single hit that is coming in. I have to do a profile lookup. Once I got the profile lookup, I take that profile and figure out using AI ML models and my rules how to provide the best possible experience to this customer. And mind well, this has to happen in split milliseconds, literally. So access to the data, being able to run the queries becomes important. Next use case actually is batch segmentation. Batch segmentation is a relatively simple looking thing, again, saying, hey, all databases, relational databases, and all these things have been happily running what we call the query on top of a database. Batch segmentation is running multiple such queries. That's all that actually gets to. But here again, the same problem actually comes, which is you got fragmented identities, you have fragmented profiles, stitch it together and run queries on top of it at the scale. Now, understanding the scale of the data, what we see is a typical enterprise, just taking an example of Adobe, has hundreds of millions of profiles. A single profile easily gets into a megabyte scale. So you can easily see that for a single enterprise, the scale of these 360 profile data gets to half a petabyte to petabyte very easily. And for Adobe, we are solving this problem for a large number of enterprises, and it's simply multiplied by number of customers, which is again in thousands. That's the scale that we are running. And at that scale, we are running these batch segmentation and queries. Streaming segmentation is a new word. This is very closely associated with this real-time personalization. In the streaming segmentation, you have continuous events that are coming in from IoT-like devices. Okay, you're getting it from mobile, you're getting from web. We have actually data streamed directly from different sources. As a single event actually arrives in the networks on the edges or in a hub, you have to look up the profile, you have to load auxiliary data sets and run queries. Now, these queries are running a simple triggered campaign, abandoned cart actually runs on top of these kind of things. But there are many more use cases that actually run on top of this streaming segmentation. And the scale of this streaming segmentation, which is running query on top of the data, is kind of staggering. You have to start thinking about this simple aspect saying these segmentation queries versus profile lookup queries, these all queries, easily thousands of queries run for one single customer. Thousands of customers, you're in a million queries being run and that are running against a single event that is arriving. And you got a millions of events coming every single second. You can look at the product saying that, wow, this is a scale that is coming. This is where the streaming segmentation is going. And now with that, I want to kind of just start looking at saying, this has to start getting us thinking about the scale of the problem that we're looking at, the amount of data we're looking at, the latency considerations, et cetera, et cetera. That is becoming the most important thing. So when at Adobe, we started building this platform, this was some of the important things. And there was very earlier on, we went into partnership with Aerospike and started looking at the technologies that we're bringing in and how the different big data technologies that were available, databases that were getting available, and how we can actually start stitching this story in a manner where we can actually start actually servicing these use cases. Let's start looking at the overall flow of the information and how this information is going to move from one end of the system all the way to the far end of the system. So on the far left side, actually, of this, what we call the data collection system. In the data collection system, you have data. What we say is that the data is anonymous or known. It's really the identity that is in the data that is either known or that is unknown. That's what we're talking about. Now, this identity, anonymous identity, or what called PI identity, comes in different forms for different channels. So the channels here, also alternately, I keep on talking about the digital surfaces, mobile, web. These are actually the surfaces. But Adobe's own solutions, such as analytics, audience manager, they are collecting data all the time. There's a second party, third party data that is actually coming. We have commerce information that is coming from commerce solutions, marketing solutions. There are enterprise systems, ERP systems, CRM systems. They all are producing data. Now, one has to start understanding saying all this data actually, as it arrives in a given system, each channel is going to be sending different data because in a large enterprise, of course, there are different groups that have their data sets and their data repositories, which are siloed. And it's very natural that the data arrives in what we call fragments. And in fact, we have accepted the fact that when we're designing the system, that this data about the profile is naturally we call fragments. So make the peace with the fact that the data is siloed, but provide a logical view of how these fragments can be stitched together. And I can give a 360 view of a single customer. So as these fragments actually arrive, okay, individual pieces, next layer actually of this system gets down to saying, I want to kind of start understanding data governance on top of this. Data governance gets down to GDPR-like regulations. There are regulations coming from Brazil. There are regulations coming from Japan, Thailand. All these new regulations actually talk about what rights consumers have about their data, because we are talking about here consumer data and the privacy. There is the RBAC style situations that enterprise wants. Who has access to what data? If I'm in a healthcare vertical or a FinServ vertical, access controls becomes extremely important part. The entire IAB standards on consent and opt-in, opt-out, those are actually other regulations that need to be in place. But regulations are just one aspect of it. The other aspect that comes in are important is that data is fragmented, but there is no structure to this data. So the structure needs to be provided. This is where we provide a data structuring aspect, which is what we call extensible data model. XDM itself is a data model that looks almost like a JSON structure. XDM is completely open source in a Git repository outside. There are many companies who are participating in defining this. For each vertical, these XDMs are actually be getting standardized. And these are advisory, I would say, in the sense that for an enterprise, you look at the best practices that are there for your vertical and you start utilizing that towards your enterprise applications and also start changing those and you can start making use of it. Next portion, we actually touch on this one. This is identity graph. This is another important problem. How do you solve the graph database style problems? Again, here, interesting aspect you have to start thinking about is that the data set looks relatively shallow in the sense that, hey, I have just identities that and the linkages between identities and the meta information that is about the linkage that actually arrives at the time the data is collected. But meanwhile, the identity graph is real time. So you're updating on a continuous basis. On this identity graph, there are actually probabilistic algorithms that are running that are trying to figure out what the stitch actually means. Scale of identities is in trillions of identities that exist. So yes, the total data of identities is not that large, maybe 50 terabytes, 100 terabytes, but there's extreme scale at which these identities actually getting looked up. And that scale, what we have today is that we look at saying that several millions of hits per second at an API access level, if you have a database that needs to withstand this particular thing. So building the clusters that actually handle this. This is where we actually started working very earlier on different database technologies. And definitely when we were looking at Aerospike, that provides the kind of bare bone ability to get there, saying that this scale of actually information that can be stored and retrieved is very easy. All the information looks very small. The simple scale and the latency expectations becomes really daunting with other technologies that we have explored. And you name technology, we have actually looked at it already. All this thing comes together into the central piece, which is this unified profile. And the unified profile actually is the piece, although we say it's unified, it's actually a piece that is logically unified. You have these identities, which are stitched, which is a graph that is sitting somewhere else. You have these profile fragments that are converted into what we call XDM data model. And the fragments are maintained literally like fragments. We don't actually bring it together. We don't hard merge anything. They're sitting. So if you look at for a single person, I may have 50 or 100 different fragments. Each fragment may have tens of kilobytes of data that is sitting there. This gets to a megabyte size profile very easily. And now you got hundreds of millions of users that you actually have to do this for. This is the view of the profile. So when you start, I was talking about a single point lookup use case. Think about from a database perspective, what is going to happen. I want to do a point lookup. Firstly, go to the identity database, pick up all the connected identities, then pick up all the fragments, then put it together under the regulations, which are governance and privacy regulations. And I got one point lookup done. This is the aspect that becomes important, whether I'm doing batch segmentation, the use case that I talked about, streaming segmentation, personalization, or AI ML workloads. Once you have this, the next piece, which is what we call activations. Activations are various different surfaces where the data actually starts getting activated. Activation story essentially is, if you look at a target like application, which is a personalization recommendation system, that is an activation story. If you look at a DSP situation where I want to send the segments out to, let's say, Google, Facebook, or MediaMath, these essentially are activation point. You're sending the data out to the outside parties. If you're looking at a customer service endpoint, a customer support, providing the next best actually dialogue, what the story should look like, selecting that and providing that content over the person is the activation point. All those decisions are based on this central piece, what we call the customer profile. And so far, this entire discussion was as if this customer profile is sitting in one single location. However, my activation story actually goes down to saying that, oh, the activation doesn't happen in my central place where I'm trying to store the profile. The activation happens in a very large distributed network we call the edge network. And therefore, this whole notion of edge activation and edge profile. Okay, and now personalization story really starts coming together, personalization and individualization, which is how do you take these massive profiles, make sure they're available on these edges, and there I'm going to be doing the personalization. Okay. Now, before we actually jump into the next steps on the personalization story, let's look at what a profile actually means and what it looks like when I look at the product itself. So this gives a little bit tangible feel to what a profile is. So in a simple form, here's a UI that actually shows a customer profile. A customer profile, person has a name, person has a gender information that is available. And you have essentially information about a person that is actually getting collected from a different customer inputs, person's address, okay, person's location information available. You may have information that is actually coming from other sources such as CRM data sources, ERP data sources. And there is also this information about identities and identity fragmentations. How do I take all these different identities and put it together and showing these identities exist for a customer and these identities are linked. And this linkage is this point, a view in point in time, okay, at the point the request was made. And there's another thing that is curious thing at the top, which is events. This is the time series data that is actually collected on this user. All this information is getting put together in a one single system. Okay, that system essentially is the unified profile and its scale of the data that we're looking at. Once this, once you take this view of this profile is what we're trying to activate in a distributed form. Let's just look at a beef architecture, and this is kind of a simple engineering sketch of what that architecture looks like. It's a very conceptual view, but on the right-hand side, what I'm showing is edge. Edge is this data center I'm talking about. Adobe has large number of data centers which are actually scattered through US as well as different continents. And every single location, we are actually receiving requests about the interactions on a customer from various different digital services. And we are responding with personalization. This is the massive network that exists out there. We call the edge network. On the left-hand side, you got this unified profile repository, which is another large database. So this all starts looking like massive databases that are actually getting structured in multiple different places. These hubs themselves, what I talk about the hub on the left-hand side, these hubs are essentially every continent has their own hub and number of edges that are actually connecting. The repository size for a single enterprise for unified profile, as I was talking about, is hundreds of terabytes of data for a single customer, and thousands of customers essentially actually using the systems. That actually gets the scale of the system that you can understand we're building towards. This data, we do essentially what we call projection, which is collecting information out of this, projecting it out onto the edges, and we call the activation profile. This projection is done on every single time the profile changes. In real time, the information is being dispatched. And on the edges, we're building a replica of the information. And this replica is who is active on this particular edge. Take that information. Now make that information available to the personalization application. That is the overall story saying how personalization application gets it. And now personalization application has a simple point lookup that is going into this activation profile cache that says in a milliseconds, I can actually kind of pull the data out. Now you can see this is all the big data story and the queries running on top of this. We started this journey more than 5 years ago. Very earlier on, we started actually working with Aerospike in this particular situation. It was very clear that the technological advantage was there to kind of make sure we can actually get there. But as we started using the technology, one of the other benefits that came in, it wasn't just about the latency. It wasn't about the throughput we could get. The reliability of the system started becoming the next key aspect as we started building the system. The system is deployed in extremely large scale right now in different edge locations, but the level of reliability we can get, the throughput and scale, and we can maintain the predictable SLAs. Because once you build these large scale systems, faults that happen in the systems really can bring down the entire thing, and customer satisfaction, enterprise customer satisfaction suffers, and so does the customer experience that we are trying to manage. So getting those things also managed well has become important. And our partnership actually helped us a lot working with Aerospike, and we also learned a lot in that process. And a lot of these learnings we have actually been capturing through various different blogs we've been writing. Here are just a list of few blogs that I've actually published in last couple of months, Feel free to look at them. And there are several others my team has been actually producing on a continuous basis. And you will see mention of different problems we have faced and how we have been solving it. I'm happy to help you with respect to any questions you have. Of course, I can be reached at my last name, Nawathe at adobe.com. Feel free to reach me in how you like, as well as comment on the blogs. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, we've come to the end of our 3 days together here at Aerospike Summit 2020. Thank you so much for attending the event with us. Again, we've had over 800 people register from some 35 or more countries and 5 continents across the world. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you again to our premier sponsors, Intel and HPE. We certainly just could not have done this event without your support. So thank you again. And for everybody who attended sessions, whatever you could make, I hope you found those valuable. I want to remind you that we are going to keep the platform open for another week. This will allow people from other time zones to be able to get to sessions they couldn't get to because of the time of day where they are located. But that means anybody who missed any sessions can come back and revisit the portal, find the session, listen to it. And the reason you may want to do that is the more sessions you see, the more content you download, the more points you win to win some of those prizes that we mentioned early on. So with that, thank you again for spending 3 days with us at Aerospike 2020, and we look forward to seeing you next year at Aerospike Summit 2021. Thank you.